Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of The Rat and the Raccoon with Nukes and Wheezy. And today we are going to be talking about scary moments in video games. Now, this isn't any sort of ranked list. This is our most personal, frightening experiences that we've had with video games. So, Nukes, I'm going to throw it over to you to get this started.
All right. I picked games that were more personal childhood traumas for me. So there are definitely some full-blown horror games later on that I've picked, but the first one, I'm sure anybody that has played this game can relate. You probably can too, Wheezy. And that is the countdown on Sonic the Hedgehog when you're drowning. That dun 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 dun, dun. It just
Oh,
fills me with anxiety, even thinking about it today. Just
oh my good lord. You have brought back so many traumatic memories with such few words, but I definitely feel the same. I must have blocked that out mentally because it's not on my list at all today. But I understand why I psychologically kicked it from all of my memories. I'm beginning to sweat a little bit here based on that one.
um, what's your next one? Or your
Yeah.
first one,
Well,
actually?
my first one. Yeah. So my first one, it's a little bit strange and it's very like you had just mentioned childhood trauma. Not as severe as the one we've just spoken about. But it's from Super Mario Land on the Game Boy. Since I was 4 or 5 years old, I've always had a video games console. And my first one was the Game Boy. And there's actually pictures of me in a stroller when I was only a wee little fella holding my Game Boy. Now, did I know what was going on a lot of the time? I don't know. But it
You
was
know now?
yeah, I know now, and it was definitely definitely one of my favorite childhood toys for sure. But one game that does actually stick out in my memory is Super Mario Land. So I don't know if you've ever played that. Have you played it, Nukes?
I don't believe I have.
I'll just give you a little background on it. It's a pretty standard Mario game for the time, right? So there's 4 worlds, there's 3 levels in each world. It actually, instead of like the Mushroom Kingdom, it takes place in a place called Sarasaland, and you have to rescue Princess Daisy from this evil boss called Tatanga. So it's a little bit different from the run of the mill stuff that we would have been used to from Mario games at that time with regards the characters in the area that's involved. But the platforming is very similar. But after each boss fight, you go into this additional room or this next room where you approach Princess Daisy, or so you think. She says, "Thank you, Mario." But what's actually happening here is you're being duped. This really isn't Princess Daisy, and a transformation occurs to show who or what is really in her place. So on World 1, it's this like fly bee creature. It's like this cross between a fly and a bee. World 2, it looks like this octopus crab type of creature. And then in World
Mhm.
3, it's this spider looking thing. Now, on the surface, you're listening, and then yeah, people are probably like, what's so scary about this? Yeah, like in my mind, as a young kid playing this game, horror wasn't really defined to any great extent. But there was the whole good versus evil concept, which would have been all over like the cartoons and movies that I consumed at that time. And the idea of the use of transformation by an evil character was like a very creepy concept that was seen throughout like those childhood stories for me. So while the visual in the game itself isn't scary as such, I would have kind of like used my imagination inspired by those other stories and kind of put two together to realize that this was a weird thing and kind of made me feel, oh, like, whoa, God, these bad guys are creepy like those other bad guys in the movies. So it kind of would have given me that kind of a vibe back then. You know, I had something to relate it to, I guess. But I think the stronger emotional reaction and kind of like the closest to fear, even though it really wouldn't have been like fear, was that a sense of achievement or victory was snatched away from me. In particular,
Mm,
in the first world, right? Because this is the first time that it happens to you in the game. So I guess I was wary or kind of guarded for the rest of the game with regards every interaction I had where I was presented to be victorious. So overall,
mm.
like while not like a horror experience, it kind of evoked an apprehension in me as it made me kind of consider all of those, creepy bad guys, and it caused me to be guarded to a certain degree in my playthrough, like actual horror games do, but obviously they do it to a much greater extent. So that's my first, I would say, more apprehensive experience with
Hmm.
games.
This still has like the tokens of horror though, because it's something that you expect, and then it's taken away, as you said. So
Yeah,
that's a
and
pretty good one.
the audio as well, like especially when I don't know if it's in World 2 and 3 as well, but the World 1 sticks out in my mind the most. Of just the sound of the transformation too sounds electric-y, evilly sound. I don't know. It's very hard
Mhm.
to describe it, but yeah, it evokes weird things in me. But yeah, that's my first one.
Nice. My next one is also on Game Boy, and it's more really at first I thought it was going to be a particular one, but I think it's just the concept of it over these games. It's from the Pokemon series, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, particularly the I guess the first three um groups of games, because I really didn't. I mean, I've played them all, but these were the ones I played as a kid, and it's the rival in the games. Particularly Blue in Pokemon Red and Blue. He just,
Oh,
you're like I'm 8 years old, 8 or 9 years old, playing Pokemon for the first time. I picked Charmander because he's fire. That's cool. And you get the shit knocked out of you from the first two gyms because of the type difference. And if you don't know anything,
yes.
like oh, let me get this type of Pokemon to beat Brock, and then whatever, you can do it easily, if you already know. But you're 8 years old and you have Charmander and a Rattata, and that's it. You've been brutalized from
And your
the first
dreams.
couple gyms.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you get through Misty's gym and you somehow beat her. And I guess it's maybe I forgot to go to the Pokemon Center. I'm not positive if you can go. I think you can. And then you get ambushed by fucking Blue or Gary Oak if you watch the anime. And he just stomps the ground with you. And this happens several times in the earlier Pokemons where your rival just pops up at the most inopportune time. And it's kind of it's the feeling of it's not really horror or terror or anything, but it's kind of that feeling of like when you get pulled over by the cops. It's like it's like, oh god.
You're right. You're 100% correct. Go on.
It, they just they ambush you throughout the games. You never know where they're going to show up. I mean, after you've played them a couple times, sure, you're like, okay, I'm gonna fight Blue up here, so I better go to the Pokemon Center. But the first time when you're a dumb 8-year-old, it's pretty terrifying. It's
And not
like,
just that, you're
oh
blind too. You don't know when it's going to happen.
no, no, you're just walking
Give
along.
yourself more credit. Give yourself more. Yeah, speak to the inner child in yourself. Give yourself more credit. You just didn't know when those things were going to happen too, right?
No, you didn't know. It's just here he is all of a sudden. Like, oh great. But then after, even if you beat Blue, he still like insults you when he leaves. It's like smell you later.
So what happened in the more recent suite of Pokemon games with your rival? It's almost like they want to be in a relationship with you.
Yeah. It's like, oh hey buddy, let me who your Pokemon and cook you dinner, and here's a gift too.
So yeah, I full transparency. Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow were the games I played growing up, and I loved them. But then
Mhm.
I didn't play a single Pokemon game up until Sword and Shield. Is that right? It's Sword and Shield, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was absolutely shocked and confused. Not that I'm using this as a scary moment within this list or anything like that, just so we're clear about this. But I was very shocked and confused about why the rival was so nice.
I didn't realize he was the rival for the longest. It's like,
Yeah.
where's my rival at? Oh, it's this guy that keeps healing me before every fight?
That keeps hitting on me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just something additional that I wanted to point out there, but another good one for sure, man. Yeah, Pokemon as a child, I remember when those games were coming out first. Me and my brother had a Game Boy each, I'm pretty sure,
Mhm.
and this is such a particular memory, and I don't think I've even thought about it since it's happened. But as kids, we don't have a whole bunch of money, right? We're very,
Mhm.
very young. So our best chance was us just getting one game and having to share it. But I'll
Mhm.
never forget this. We went to my aunt's wedding. And at my aunt's wedding, this unknown relative kept putting money in me and my brother's hands to the point in which we'd actually scooped up enough cash to pay for both of the games ourselves. Now, by pay for both of the game ourselves, I mean this person just gave us like a whole bunch of money. And to this day, I don't know who that relative was. It was like a second cousin of a cousin or something, something like that. But it was just awesome that we were able to both share like the experience of Pokemon together with our own copies
Mhm.
back then. So yeah, that's a weird, very fond memory that I actually have in my mind that popped up today in our super spooky, scary podcast that we're supposed to be having. But yeah, awesome one. Yeah, completely forgotten about the rival in Pokemon and how anxiety inducing that can be. I'm gonna roll with my next one here, and this game is an absolute classic. And if anyone has a problem with this game being an absolute classic, you're not a real gamer. Right? Okay, obviously, everybody, it's like opinions are subjective, and that's what I believe. You're allowed to have your own opinions, but it's Star Fox on the Super
Mm.
Nintendo.
Don't think
Countless.
anyone will argue with you.
No, nobody's gonna argue with this, but countless hours of my childhood on that game. Doesn't need much of an introduction, but just to give people an overview if you're not familiar with it. Rail shooter game. You play as Fox McCloud and the Star Fox team alongside you, fighting the good fight in their R-Wing spacecraft against the mad scientist Andros and his forces. It gave me one of my first ever oh hell no moments, to be honest. The final boss is Andros, right? As I just mentioned,
Mhm.
he's the big bad guy, but he's in the form of a huge floating head, which I could best describe as like imagine the face from the robots in iRobot, but more polygonal, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Does that make sense to you? I think that's a good way to
Yeah.
describe it. So you're fighting against this huge head, right? So there's a load of blocks and debris that kind of gets spat at you, and you have to dodge it all while you're trying to take down Andros. But the scariest part of this fight is when he starts to inhale. So he starts to inhale, and all of a sudden, you feel this aggressive gravitational pull because he's trying to like get you closer and closer just so he can eat you and swallow you up. And oh my god, I remember back in the day, just the level of tension that brought. It's like squeezing the buttons so tight on the controller. And in real life, like leaning and pulling my body back and to the left or the right, reflecting whatever movement I was doing in game to try and pull away and survive. And then once like the inhale stopped, I'd feel this sense of relief from all of that tension that had built up from the terror that I was encountering. And it just one of those things I always remember being like, oh boy, like, whew, glad that's over. Glad I got through that.
Yeah, one of those where you're about break the controller and trying to get through.
Yeah, it's like a more extreme version of, you know, when you play driving games and you turn the
Yeah.
you turn the controller, even though it does nothing, you turn the controller as you would be moving the steering wheel. It's like a very extreme version of that, but it's your entire body uh, getting pulled. I don't know if anybody listening has ever experienced like sleep paralysis, but it's like that feeling of when you're trying to like pull yourself out of the paralysis. It's kind of like the best way I can describe how I personally felt boss fight. You've played that, right?
Yeah, it's been a very long time. I don't remember much about it though.
Oh,
It's
it's
been ages.
yeah, and it's been such a long time since I played it as well that I went and I looked up the fight to make sure that I was fact checking correctly and I wasn't misremembering because you know, Nukes, we're getting to the age now where we're beginning to fabricate some memories and we're beginning to
That's
to
all right.
to misremember stuff. So if anybody's listening and you hear any facts that might be a little bit incorrect or wonky, that's why. But when I was looking up the video, there's an additional kind of fun fact I want to throw in here. Um, I got this suggestion for a video about a secret boss in the game, and you can actually fight a slot machine in space. It's an actual slot machine. Bizarre. It's against this like hallucinogenic space backdrop, and the song "When the Saints Go Marching In" is playing at 1.2. It's very, very bizarre. You actually have to like fire at the handle to pull the reel or whatever it's called. And once you get 3 sevens, the fight is over. And I think you can actually kill it by straight up damaging it as well, but I'm not entirely sure on that. Um, so very, very weird. And depending on what role you get to, you can get like collectible coins, or you might have to dodge lasers or even shoot at enemies. So very super weird Easter egg to throw in there, but I thought it was interesting.
I think you can go ahead and do your next one too,
You know
Chris.
what? I was going to suggest that I go ahead. I know I've been talking for quite some time here, but I think it makes sense for me to roll into my next one because it's also from Star Fox.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
I believe this is my first game with my N64, and I was pumped for this. This game was hard pushed by Nintendo Official Magazine back in the day, in particular for the use of like the new Rumble Pack, right? And the 4-player local gaming experience. Um, all of these fresh and new things in comparison to the Super Nintendo, right? The game did not disappoint at all as a young fella. I fucking loved this game. Incredible experience. When I was watching clips of it, when I was doing my prep work for the podcast, I not only got this like incredible feeling of nostalgia with it, but I really wanted to pick it up and play it immediately. And I'd be curious to see how it actually holds up today from a gameplay mechanic and feeling perspective. But that's just besides the point. I wanted to bring up the final boss with Andross in this game as well. The enemy that you fight this time round is a biological head of the kind of traditional version of Andross as he's shown throughout the game. But what happens is if you take the harder route, and after you defeat this initial version of Andross, he shows his true form. And my God, did it terrify me. His true form in Star Fox 64 is simply a floating brain and 2 floating eyes. I was really taken aback. Number one, from the perspective that I was not expecting it. And number two, the kind of newer graphics of the 64 at the time was able to kind of convey more frightening imagery, if you will. So I had to use less of my imagination in that regard. So it really creeped the hell out of me. And there's an aspect of the gameplay too that scares me. He's also got these kind of neurological tendrils on his brain that you can easily get caught up in. and it does
Mm.
damage to you. So it kind of gives you that same level of tension that I'd mentioned about the final boss fight in the Super Nintendo game, where it's kind of like this fear of trying to dodge this attack and the sense of relief after you get away from it and eventually defeat him. And also, as well, the end sequence after you defeat Andros is filled with tension. You have to navigate your way through these tunnels, and you know that behind you explosions are occurring, and you have to ensure that you're following the apparition of James McCloud, who is Fox McCloud's passed away dad. Just make sure you have to follow him out through the correct path. And as a game like that's or as a game as a kid, and that's an edge of your seat experience, and it's incredible. So I know it's meant to be like scary stuff and whatever, but these moments that I'm talking about today, not only are they fear inducing and they were scary for me back then, but they're also really, really quality gaming moments that I'll never forget.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, like we said, it's our childhood traumas from games. And there's something about those polygons back in the day that can like display a bit of horror that you might not even be expecting just in a normal game, and it just it's unease, I guess. My next game, which is a traditional horror game, it's Resident Evil 2. One of my
Yes,
favorite games of
brother.
all time.
Yes.
If we don't have to go over the whole song and dance. All roads lead to Resident Evil with me. But it's in particular the very first time I ever played it. I had never played a Resident Evil before. I played 2 before I played 1. And you go through the whole streets with the zombies, and you're kind of getting used to the zombies. And when you get to the police station and um you walk by this window and you see something crawl by real quick. Something different. It's you don't know what it is yet. When you go into the next room, you see something looking through the window at you. And it's just, of course, it's a horror game, so it's building this tension of something's watching you, something's whatever. When you go around the corner, you're treated to a cutscene of the liquor, the very first encounter with it. And it like Andros, his brain, the liquor's brain's exposed, so that's that's how I was relating it. But not it's just now it's this new enemy that's can jump around. It's got a long tongue that can attack you from further back. They're terrifying on their own, but in particular, there's one room that to this day gives me anxiety, even going into it. I guess from the childhood trauma of it happening the first time. And you go down one of the hallways and you go into the interrogation room and you see this uh, two-way mirror. And I
Mm.
get, you're not thinking anything of it, really. I guess you should at this point, but and there's this item that you need on the other side, and you walk over to get it, and I can't remember. I'm a little fuzzy on if it's on your way there or on your way back. The liquor jumps through the mirror and attacks you.
All
I had to turn the game off. I was 9 years old. I turned the game off.
right. Well, let's take this right into the Resident Evil remake one that I was going to talk about too, and we'll just chat
Mhm.
about both of them. I think this will be perfect. It's the L-shaped corridor, and it's the Cerberus dogs that jump through the window. Like you, Nukes, and the reason I wanted to jump into this so quickly was I had the exact same reaction that you had. I turned off the game immediately and I didn't touch it for a few days. No word of a lie. And I don't know, like if you felt the same, if this was like your first true horror experience, but did you have that feeling of, oh, holy fuck, games can be scary and hurt me emotionally? I had no idea that existed. I don't know if you felt the same with your Ori 2 experience.
I can't think if I played another true horror game before that. but that's the first one I fully remember. Like it, like I said, it's even to this, like, even when the Resident Evil 2 remake, I opened the door to the interrogation room and I got anxiety a little bit because I'm like, oh no, I'm a full grown adult, and this scar from my childhood is like, oh no, I know what room I'm in, and I know what's gonna happen, and it's worse because I know what's gonna happen.
The best scares I find are the ones that are about to happen from like your previous experiences, but they still manage to evoke that sense of dread. And maybe even at times I've definitely jumped, even though I know it's coming. So yeah, it's very, very similar experience there with our first experiences with Resident Evil. I think you will agree that, especially the dogs through the window, like that must have shaved about 5 years off my life. 100%, like no doubt about it. That like really, like genuinely, really, really fucked me up. And to the point in which I almost felt like I'd made a mistake buying the game, that I wasn't cut out for it.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Even with the dog in Resident Evil 1 in the remake, I never come. There's a way you can do it where the dogs won't jump through ever, and I make sure I never come back up through that way.
Wait, you always do
Like
it the way where it won't happen or it will happen?
where it won't.
Oh, really? Yeah, because I think you have to approach it from the exhibition room. If you approach it from the exhibition room, you know that room where the lady drawing water
Yeah.
is? I think that's the name of the statue is. I think if you approach it from that direction, the glass will just crack a little bit, which is kind of like a wink to the
hmm
people who have played like RE1 OG,
hmm
and they're like kind of the devs are pretty smart with that, actually putting that in there, being like, oh, it's just a window crack. Do you think we'd be silly to put in the same jump scare twice? But yeah, like you'd mentioned, if you come down the other way, it actually they jump right through the window and you immediately shit your pants. Very, very smart.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think in the original it happens no matter what. You go down that hallway and they jump out, but you can avoid it in remake. And
Yeah.
I almost always avoid it. It's like I don't want to relive that.
That's funny that
Uh,
you take the route to avoid it. I read something, and this is going a little bit off track here, and we might cut this out, but I'm just curious. I saw a picture of web spinners, spiders, whatever you want to call them, in that
mhm.
L-shaped corridor. So I was like, hold on a second. I've never once seen in any of my playthroughs, I've never seen those spiders in that area. And apparently, I read on Reddit that someone said if you go back to that area after you get the helmet key, after you fight
Mhm.
Plant 69 or whatever it's called in sorry Plant
Plant
42,
420.
sorry, yeah, Plant 420, it is Plant 42, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
okay. Do you think they called it Plant 42 on purpose, or is that too early for the 420 thing?
I don't know. Maybe they were already saying 420 back then.
All right,
I don't know.
we need to do a full blown analysis video on that immediately after this podcast. But yeah, apparently, if you go back to that area after you get the helmet key, there are spiders there. I don't know if that's true or not. I was so tempted to load up Ori remake and see if that was true, but I didn't really have time.
I've never seen the spiders. Not in that room.
No, interesting. We'll have to check it out. We'll have to check that out.
My next one is from Silent Hill 3. And Silent Hill is full to the brim of these moments. But I've picked two from this game. Is one of them is very short, so I'll do it first.
Wait.
And there's this room early on, and I think it's the mall, and you find this mannequin, and Heather says something. The protagonist Heather, she says something about mannequins being creepy. I don't know. It's whatever. And you walk around and out of view of the mannequin, and you hear this scream and a thud. And you go back, and the mannequin's head's been cut off, and there's blood everywhere. That's pretty terrifying. you
Yeah,
know,
I'd say. You thought mannequins were scary, Heather? What about the thing that just fucked up the mannequin? That is spooky.
Of course. And then there's in the mall. There's or maybe this is Silent Hill 2. I don't. One of them could be. There's a bathroom stall, and if you knock on it, um, it'll say no one's in there, or it's occupied, or whatever. And later on, or maybe at the same time, you'll be walking away, and you'll hear a knock back from the stall, and nothing's in there. Just a little to unease you. But
Oh,
the main one I wanted to talk about is there's plenty of enemies and stuff that are terrifying in Silent Hill, but there's this one particular room the first time you play, and it's in the hospital. It's just this random room you walk into, and it has this big mirror. And you start noticing that the reflection room, like the room in the reflection, is like bleeding. This is after it's already turned to like the dark Silent Hill version of the hospital. I believe it's the hospital. It's just the reflection part, though. The room is just bleeding, is spreading throughout the room, and
that's awesome.
After a while, it'll leak through, and your room starts bleeding, and that room's clean now. But your reflection starts getting covered in blood, and after a while, your reflection stops moving, even though you can still move. You're still clean. This is probably confusing, but talking about the reflection of you is covered in blood, but its room's clean. Your side of the room is covered in blood, but you're clean. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And your reflection will stop moving after a little while, and you can still run around, but there's this very small window where you can escape this room. Like this whole time, you can't leave the room. Like if you try to go, I think it says it's locked or it's stuck or something like that. You can't leave, and you have to sit there. You're forced to watch
I was
this
just going to
thing
ask.
come.
You're
Yeah,
forced to like look at this.
yeah. I think there's a very small window you can escape, and it's not. I think it's right around when the reflection stops moving. I'm not positive on that because I never, if I've ever walked in that room, I've died. But there's no point to the room. There's no puzzle to solve. There's no item to get. It's just a room to kill you. And it eventually does. Once the room is covered in blood, like your side of the room is covered in blood, the camera sort of blurs a little bit, and you die. That's the whole point. It's just there to murder you and force you to watch it unfold with nothing that you can do besides that small window where you maybe can escape.
The fact that that exists is so scary, that a room is just there for funsies to get you.
That's it. That's all.
I mean,
It's
the
just there
way
to.
you describe like the visuals and how that unfolds and the order of events, it sounds like to me like the coolest fucking thing ever. As an adult, I'm not sure what year did the game come out.
2003, 4, somewhere in there, I think.
Yeah, it probably would have given me a little bit of creeps back then. But as an adult, it's like, oh man, that's actually sounds like a really cool and creative way to kill somebody with the small window of time, and you're forced to watch the transformations occur from room to room, from reflection to reflection, I guess, or reflection to room. Better way of
Yeah.
putting it. But I'm actually straight away when we finish up the podcast. I'm actually gonna go and watch that. It actually sounds really really sick. When you looked, because this is a little thing I've noticed in horror sometimes. When you looked at that room first, and I don't know if you're gonna be able to remember this. Did you look at the room and immediately look at it and go, oh, it's the room, but something felt off, but you couldn't identify it straight away?
Yeah, because it's this giant mirror, and it's Silent Hill, so it's probably gonna fuck with you.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't fully remember how quick it starts. But it's not very long after you're in the room that the other side starts bleeding. The reflection does. But then, you can't leave. You turn around to leave because you think, oh, I'm about to get killed by something. A monster's fixing to come through, and I'm not prepared.
Hmm.
But the door's stuck.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fucking it gives me shivers. Yeah, one of my like favorite things, especially kind of in horror movies, is when you're shown something that you should be familiar with and how the view of it looks, you should be comfortable with it, but you know something is off. And one movie that does this really, really well, it's kind of fucking lame, right? Well, hear me out. I think it's Paranormal Activity 3. I think it's like the third installment, right? Where they set up this camera that moves from one side of the kitchen directionally to the other side. It pans from the section where like the sink and all of the kitchen utensils would be over to
Mhm.
like the seating area. When it pans
Mhm.
back to the seating area of the room, kind of stop for a second and you go, wait a minute, something's off here. And you can't tell what it is straight away. And then all of a sudden, the fucking furniture just comes crashing down from the ceiling, which had been out of view. You're like, holy shit, all the furniture was missing. And then, holy shit, that just scared the shit out of me. There's so much that happens at once. But I love that kind of observational horror, I guess, or spot the difference type of things. So that's super, super cool. Awesome. Yeah, I'll do my next one. And it is now a classic at this point, which pains me to say it. I don't think it's veering towards retro just yet, but we're almost there. Gears of War 1. Have you played Gears of War?
Very briefly back in the day. I didn't play it a lot though, so I know almost nothing about Gears of War.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll give you an overview, very, very high level, and very quick overview of the first game. It's set on an Earth-like planet called Sarah, and the core of Sarah is hollow and contains a resource known as emulsion. But it's also home to these creatures called locusts. So,
Mhm.
14 years before the events of Gears 1, an event known as Emergence Day takes place. And this is where the locust horde rises up from the ground and wreaks havoc. Fast forward 14 years, the human race is on the brink of being wiped out, and you're playing as a former soldier named Marcus Phoenix with Delta Squad, and you're trying to fight back against them. That's pretty much it, like at a super high level. So the combat of the game is third person, over the shoulder, duck and cover kind of style shooter. It's incredibly fun. Like it's got one of my favorite weapons, which we'll be doing a podcast on at some point. The Lancer, and it's got like a chainsaw attached to the end of it, so you could literally go up to an enemy, press a button, and it plays this kind of like mini cutscene within the fight of you like absolutely demolishing or cutting your enemy in half in this beautifully gory and bloody scene. So as a 17-year-old or however old I was at the time, I just thought it was the coolest fucking thing ever. Um but yeah, one of my scary moments in video games is built in to a no, it's not really a boss fight. It's more of it's considered a level, but I wouldn't really call it a boss fight because there's more of these types of creatures. In my mind, boss fights are very like you're fighting a unique character. We don't need to get too fucked or too bothered about the semantics of what I'm saying, but the creature that I'm referencing here is called the Berserker, right?
Mm.
The Berserker kind of comes into play maybe an hour into your Gears of War experience, right? Within that first hour of Gears, you're primarily fighting against these like bipedal, two armed, scaly reptilian humanoid looking enemies that yield guns. And you get used to that type of combat, right? This duck and cover, as I'd mentioned, firing your gun and just being able to demolish them with your chainsaw. So you're getting comfortable with what you're doing. You're like getting into your stride, and then all of a sudden, she arrives, and by God, does she make an entrance? This creature is like a bulkier, taller, broader, stronger version of those locust mobs that I just mentioned. She's like, I believe, 10 foot tall or something like that. The best way I can actually describe her is just imagine that she's like the Brock Lesnar of locusts. Like she fucking like huge, right? Thing is, she has no sense of sight, but she can hear you and she can smell you. Now, the first time we're introduced to the Berserker, we see her being led by two regular mobs with chains, who she quickly just fucking whips out of the way. I think one of them gets whipped into like a column, and the other one gets like fired like way down the room. So they've got no control over the over this fucking thing. Like, and one of your teammates panics. So what happens is he runs around this corner and bumps into her essentially, and all you can see is like the shadows and the silhouettes, right? And she literally rips him to shreds, and the sounds are gory, and the imagery of what you can make out from the silhouettes, it just induces this fear in you that you're like, man, I've literally just gotten used to fighting these mobs and the gameplay mechanics. I'm like, oh my god, what the fuck am I gonna do against this thing? And oh yeah, by the way, normal weapons don't work on her. And you find that out in the middle of the cutscene too. So you're like, ah, great. So what the hell am I gonna do? So not only are we visually frightened by this creature, but also internally too, we've got the fear about, I have to like completely change up my playstyle right now and try to figure out how to defeat this. So in the gameplay, I give you a high level of what happens. You have to like draw her towards you, so you have to kind of like shoot in her direction so that she'll charge at you. She makes this ear-curdling scream. It's almost like a banshee scream as she charges towards you as well. So you're like, oh shit, oh shit. So you have to wait until last second, jump out of the way so she can bash through a wall that leads you into the next section, and you kind of rinse and repeat that process until you get her outside and kill her off with this bigger weapon called the Hammer of Dawn. But yeah, it's just that sense of, my god, this creature is very overwhelming, and you have to be very careful about your movements when you're actually in that fight with her, alongside those last minute kind of jumps to the side to avoid being torn to shreds by her. But yeah, that to me stands out as one of the more frightening experiences, especially at a time in my life when you're like 15 or 16 and nothing scares me. You know, you're like, nothing scares me. But that actually did scare the piss out of me.
That's a pretty good one. I like it when games sort of like play with your expectations, because that's similar to like when the liquor shows up in Resident Evil 2, is you're used to something and now here's this new enemy. That's it's really good. Mm. My next one is it's kind of I'm kind of cheated and I've put two games in one, if that's okay, but they're similar.
That's absolutely fine by me. No rules in this podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, in Left 4 Dead, the very first witch you ever encounter. I don't know if
Yes,
you've ever played
dude.
Left 4 Dead.
I'd forgotten about Left 4 Dead. Yes, yeah.
You don't know what this thing is. You hear someone crying, and then you get close, and she screeches at you, calls down a horde, and rips you to shreds. Whoever's closest to her. It's terrifying the first time it happens, and it's so effective that every time after that you hear that cry, and you're like, "Oh fuck, there's a witch nearby."
Yes. Yeah. And you know what's really like, oh man, I wish that I had thought of this one. That's actually a really fucking good one. And what sparked something in my mind there too was when you said you don't know who this person crying is. So you actually go over to them with the intention of being like kind of helpful. And with the
Yeah,
intention of like, oh, I could be a hero here. And by
exactly.
God, are your expectations blown out of the water? That's a great one.
This is just a little add-on to that, because it uses the same sort of premise as in 7 Days to Die, which is
Mm.
a survival zombie game. When you get I'm not exactly sure how many levels you get, but you get these enemies called I think they're just screamers, is what we call them. Or and they'll come to your base and scream and bring a horde down on you. And they look like the little girl from The Grudge or The Ring,
Mm.
one of those. But what's scary about them is if you ever forget and leave your door open while you're doing something, you just rushed in and left the door open, she'll just waddle in there and get up behind you and scream and bring a horde down on you. And it's kind of a cascading effect sometimes because sometimes those hordes have another screamer who will scream and bring another horde. So
Oh
it just
no.
so you can get overrun quick if one sees you. It's got that same sort of it's that scream on Twitch to scare that you know that scream
I know
that
the
they
one that you're talking about, the one that's
it
aggressively loud on everybody's
that's the
channels that
same
has that
exact
one.
it's the literal exact same scream that they have.
No fucking way. I've had that's been on my stream, hasn't it?
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
the one that you can't turn down. It's like it's impossible to turn it down. I think you have to put it to like 2 or 3% or something on the Twitch extension. I know exactly which one that is. That's insane. And this is kind of a nerdy question, right? Because I'm not familiar with. I haven't played the game. The horde that she would call down upon you, like, is that scaled in any way to your base setup or your levels, or like?
It scales to your levels, yeah, because you get
Ah,
like
okay,
stronger enemies and you get like radioactive ones that are stronger and they kind of glow. And the
okay,
higher your collective level is actually, because like if you're playing with someone in there
got you.
so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
days or whatever, most of the time the horde would be just a regular, just some zombies you have to kill. But every now and then she's got another screamer will be in it and she can scream and another screamer will be in that. And before you know it, your base is overrun and you have to either die or leave and lead them off if you can't
And will they like?
handle.
Oh, sorry. What?
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say,
Go
and will
ahead.
they like destroy your base, or are they only coming for blood? If that makes sense.
Well, I think they have I'm not exactly sure how they'll destroy your base though.
Ah,
If
okay, okay.
the door's locked and blocked, they'll bang and break through your doors and your windows and your walls to get to you.
And at our age, I think the scariest aspect about that is losing the very precious little time that we've already put into building that. Into
Yeah.
that base. It's like, I don't have time for this.
um my next one is from BioShock Infinite, and spoilers for that. I'm going to try not to spoil story stuff. I guess I should have gave spoiler warnings on other things, but um, this is about mid to the late game. Infinite has these like you go through. It's all about alternate realities and stuff like that, and in about the mid to the late of the game, you're sent to this alternate reality where your companion Elizabeth she's captured right before this, and you don't know you've moved to a new place quite yet, but it's very dreary. It's cold, um, and there's these guys all over the place, and they look like they've escaped like a early 1900s asylum, but they're wearing these founding father masks because Columbia in Bioshock Infinite is they worship the American founding fathers. They worship them like deities, kind of. And it's twisted. Something has gone awfully wrong in this reality of it, and you can avoid most of these enemies. You sneak around. They act like they don't even know you're there. But there's this one enemy. He has like this brass kind of. He's dressed kind of like a schoolboy, and he has this brass thing with, I guess, trumpets for ears, and he can spot you, and he will shriek and alert every enemy. All these psychos with the founding father mask will come down on you and attack you if he sees you, and it's terrifying in itself. So you learn quick. Okay, well, this is a stealth mission. I've got to sneak around these
Mhm.
dudes, and you go through the whole level, and you finally find. I think there's this lever you're trying to get to. I think it's the warden's office because you're trying to save Elizabeth, and you kind of piece together that this is some twisted reality that's happened because she was captured. But that's not really the point of the thing that's scary. It's the fact that when you pull the lever, you think, okay, this plays back to Super Mario Land. You know, where you're given the you think you've won this. You know,
Mm.
okay, victory. I found my lever. I've got my objective
Hmm.
done. And when you turn around, one of those fucking boys of silence is right behind you, and it shrieks immediately. There's no way to avoid it. It calls the
Oh.
alarm, and it leads everything down on you. It scares the shit out of you. You're not expect even if you are expecting it, you're like, oh god, it's coming.
That is frightening. Have you rescued Elizabeth at this point? Or have you
No,
just picked up
because
the lever thing?
you're I think you're trying to get to where she's being held
Gotcha. So you
when you
still you
think
still
she's
haven't met
being
it at
held.
that point because I've actually played Bioshock Infinite. It's the only one only Bioshock game I've actually seen through to the end. And I was just like,
Mhm.
the reason I asked, I was like, well, at least you have her by your side because she is probably the most helpful NPC in any game I've ever played.
Absolutely. You go into it when you first get, you're like, oh great, an escort mission. And then you're like, where's Elizabeth? I need Elizabeth.
Yeah, I need her.
And this
Yeah.
is the part of the game where you don't have her. You don't have her at all. There's a lot of them in Bioshock, but we're gonna go back to Resident Evil for my next one, and it's House Beneviento. Beneviento. I
Oh,
can't.
fuck. Yeah.
The very first time you play is a little less on replays, but that very first time you play it, you don't know what's going to happen. You're in this normal looking kind of house, and you go down to the fucking basement, and it's all I guess it's all hallucinations, but it's still the slow build up of the puzzles. You know the way that the basement is looks. It's just this sense of dread, and you find that mannequin that looks like
Mm.
spoilers your dead wife,
My wife.
and
Sorry.
my wife.
Sorry.
And you have to, it's just the slow buildup of puzzles and things that are unsettling you. There's phone calls going on. You have to take the mannequin apart that looks like your dead wife, and you find pictures of her shot to death, you know. And it's all leading up to the conclusion of I forget what leads you to the well. Do you remember? I think there's like maybe there's a video. You find a film, that's right, and it shows
That's
that
right.
kind of, and you're
Yeah,
like,
you
oh
get
god,
you
I'm
get
gonna
all
have to go.
the puzzle is where you have like all of the different camera rolls and
Yeah, that's right.
you put them all in order. But yeah, it then shows you that real kind of like it almost reminds me of The Ring. You know how the footage
Yeah,
like is played is like that old grainy, really old school looking thing that shows you the well. Yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah, yeah. But you're right. I'm just like backing you up here. You're correct. 100% correct. Yeah,
you have to go to this well though, and it's horrifying going down in that well when you've
dude,
never
isn't
played it
it?
before.
Isn't it like that first experience in the well? Because I know where this is going, right? But that first experience in the well is very daunting and very intense. And correct me if I'm wrong, but nothing actually, spoilers, nothing actually happens when you go down there, right? You go down there, you pick up the
I
key,
think
I
you get the
think,
little, yeah,
or
you
whatever
get
it
the
is.
little key thing.
Yeah, and then you climb back up and you're kind of like, fuck, okay, I'm kind of getting away with this. And then,
Yeah,
and then, go for it, yeah.
and then well, back up before we get there is
Oh, sorry, my bad.
they kind of no, they kind of do it a little in RE7 with the basement before you go down there and you know
Mm.
what's in there. You're like, oh god, something terrible's down here. They build that dread good, but I think they
Oh,
build
Jesus.
on it
In
for the well.
RE7, you know when the head pops up when you're going through the water? You
Oh
remember that
fuck,
part?
yeah,
Oh, that just popped into my head right now. Oh my god, that spooked me good. I'm not gonna lie.
yeah, it's awful,
Yeah.
half rotted. Yeah. But back to the well. On your way up, don't you hear like some loud banging and stuff? Like there's something up there, and then crying,
Mm-hmm.
a baby crying, and oh god, you come back, the mannequin's gone. There's like an umbilical cord leading you down the hallway to this horrible, gigantic fetus. I didn't even realize it was a fetus because I saw something move, and I was one of those pause the game for a second. It's like, what the fuck? And this thing chases you, and if it catches you, it'll swallow you whole. I didn't get caught. I ran.
Oh, you
Then
didn't
you're
get you
under
didn't
the
get caught at
bed.
all your first time? No?
No,
Ah,
no,
nice.
no. I never got caught. I didn't even know what it looked like. So that because I just ran. I could just hear it.
You didn't
And then you're under the bed,
get out.
and they do it so well because they have Ethan's. He's scared under the bed. His breaths.
Yes, yeah.
Then when you're running, you can hear it like these saying, and it'll say "da da" or
Yeah,
making these baby sounds, and
yeah.
you just hear this awful sounds of it chasing you. And I did not know what it looked like until you get to the elevator,
Get
and that's just
out. So, oh my
butt
god, that's
clenching.
so fucking. That must have been. That's such a cool experience, man. I'm kind of fucking jealous of your first time, if you will, um, against that. Like, yeah. So you didn't know the whole time up until you get to the elevator where you're like fucking frantically pressing on that button to like fucking leave. You didn't know what it looked like.
I knew it was some big nasty thing that sounded like a baby. I
That.
didn't.
Oh my
And
god.
then it grabs on those bars. With that, it's really tense trying to put that key in to get the elevator back
It is.
going.
Yeah.
And you can hear it coming, and you just run in, and then the lights go out, and then it's there on the bars, and that's when I saw it. And I was like, "Oh my
Oh
god!"
man, that's such. I never realized that was your. I never realized the particulars around your first experience with it because, like, we talk when Resident Evil games come out, we'll talk about them in code, if you
Yeah.
will. And like, I think I might have said something to you like, "Have you got to the part where they went to a really weird place yet?" And you'll be like, "No, I don't think so." Or if you have to describe rooms, you're like, "Have you gotten to the room with the telephone, but the telephone has no impact on the story? It's just in the hands of a very tall person." You know, you have to talk in code. But I man, my first experience with the baby in the Beneviento house, I was frozen in fear. I saw this thing coming at me, and I didn't pause the game. I should have, because he got way too close to me. But all that was going through my mind was, "Holy mother of God, they actually went there." That's what I thought. I was like, the devs actually, Capcom have gone there. Like, this is insanity. And then the chase and everything that you've described, hiding under the bed. And even like when you go under the bed, like they add in the additional panic in, I think they do, right? They add in this like additional kind of like breathing that you can hear Ethan doing to
Yeah.
express his fear. It's all very well done. And yeah, probably one of the more fucked up things that I've seen in a horror game in modern times, which actually leads me very nicely to kind of the last discussion that I wanted to have with you. If there's nothing else that we want to dissect in Village.
No, that's everything I got.
Sweet, yeah, and that was awesome. I hope with the new Resident Evil game that there's the same level of spooks and terror that they've been able to pretty well do in 7 and Village, because I do enjoy that stuff. But it needs to be paced correctly, which kind of like leads me on to what I wanted to say here about modern kind of horror games. I guess this comes with age too, and this comes with kind of your exposure over the years to the different horror tropes. I don't get as particularly frightened by things in video games these days. So it needs to be something that's more kind of like on the the extreme side, like Baby
Mhm.
Beneviento. That's what I'm just gonna call him,
Yeah.
Baby Beneviento. I do feel that a lot of the more there was this trend for a while that games like Outlast had where they're fun, but there's too much of a reliance on the jump scare and
Yeah.
it not being paced correctly. Now there are
Mhm.
aspects of it, like we'll say with Outlast, where it's yeah, the pacing's good, like, but it's at the start of the game, but by the time you get to the end of the game, you become very kind of like numb to it
Mm.
almost. And when you realize that you can run like throughout the game, running past jump scares doesn't have the same effect when you're kind of forced to move slower, if you will. And this kind
Yeah.
of brings me to the final game that I wanted to talk about on my side, which one chapter in particular is the Lucy chapter of Visage. So
Mhm.
Visage is heavily inspired by one of the most prolific psychological horror games that will never be released. And you probably know what I'm going to mention here.
Mhm.
PT. You play as this guy called Dwayne Anderson who lives in a house and actually lived in the house in which the game is set. And he actually took his own life after killing his wife and children in the 1980s. They show a cutscene of it. So immediately when you get into the game, you know you're in for a pretty terrifying or intense, I guess is a better word to use, experience.
Mhm.
The Lucy chapter in particular is centered around the story of a little girl who was befriended by a demon that communicated her via like television and radio, and it's set in the 1960s. And like PT, you're exploring this house that has very similar like corridors and similar areas. I know PT is a loop of the same kind of like corridor over and over
Mhm.
for the most part. But a lot of parts of the house are actually like very similar. So it's like this going around the corner and not knowing what to expect type of
Mhm.
deal. Another mechanic that people will be familiar with is I don't know if you've played Amnesia, the Dark Descent, but it's got like the insanity meter. So the more
Mhm.
time you spend in darkness, more insane you become, and supernatural events can happen. So imagine like light bulbs breaking, noises
Mm.
coming out of nowhere, and these can happen at random intervals throughout the game as well. So you're constantly kind of on edge to a certain degree. But the pacing in which they use and to achieve that sense of terror is absolutely perfect. At least in chapter one. Finding chapter two, I'm like 75% of the way through it. It's a bit of more of a slow burn. But in chapter one, you're literally in this suffocating atmosphere. And you genuinely don't know when to feel safe, and the timing of the jump scares too, it's crafted beautifully because it happens at points in which you've drifted into this false sense of security in your thinking, be it based on the in-game events or if your mind just kind of like naturally drifted away from cautious thinking, which can happen as you're playing a game. But the game seems to understand very well when you're going to be most vulnerable. So they do that wonderfully. There's also like immersive events in the game too. Like there's a wardrobe section where, kind of spoiler alert here, you have to listen very closely to each of the wardrobes to ensure that there's no sound coming from it, so that when you open up the doors, nothing is gonna jump out and grab you. But you're still not certain. Like when you get to that point in the game, if you walk up to one of these wardrobes, even if you get close to it, is something just gonna fucking burst out and grab you? Like it's just oh, like so anxiety inducing. But one of my favorite aspects of this game is the use of, I believe it's a Polaroid camera, but you have to use the flashes of the camera to help guide your way. And
Yeah.
yes, oh, dude, like
No.
from darkness to flash of light, from darkness to flash of light, from darkness to flash of light, and you just don't know what's going to be in front of you. And all of these things combined is literally one of the most frightening experiences that I've had in gaming. It truly, truly is. And it does stand out amongst its peers in the modern era. There's probably people listening to this and they're just going to turn around and say, well, the scariest aspect of this game is actually how the controls feel. Which I like, I do agree. Like the inventory like system and holding the items in your hands and how to get an item, like to drop an item or put an item in your inventory or take an item from your inventory, is ridiculous. Like it feels awful. Like the buttons that you have to press are wonky and all over the place. But that's a small price, in my opinion. Very small price to pay for how good this this game is. In particular, that first chapter. I will say that I don't think that games of this sort should have chapters like any longer than what Lucy's chapter is. I think like, I don't know, maybe it's like an hour or two at
Mhm.
most. And I think that's perfect. Like say if you want, like they did with the game, just segmented it into different chapters with their own little kind of like twists and their own
Mhm.
different brand of horror. I think that's a great idea. But I do think these types of horror experiences are better suited to shorter time periods because I'll be honest that you can only do it for so long before you actually have to like switch it off for the night.
Yeah, you
Uh,
need just good pacing. I think, like there's only people don't a lot of the time don't just sit there and play through a whole horror game
mhm.
in one go.
Yeah,
They
and
play what
thank
they
you.
can stomach.
That's what I was trying to articulate. Sorry, go on. You're yeah.
Well, they play what they can stomach of it, like playing Silent Hill games or Resident Evil does give you good breaks. I think it does a good job because like, okay, I found a safe place. I can save and I can come back later. And Silent Hill does that too, but you got to have these more linear kind of games. I guess they need to do the pacing with the chapter breaks.
Yeah, for sure. God, just like thinking about PT, I watched a full playthrough of it last night. Um,
Mm.
that part with the refrigerator hanging from the ceiling and blood dripping from it and the rattling inside it was something else.
PT altogether. Like I think there's that point when you look up and she's looking down from upstairs at you.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
terrifying.
yeah. And there's definitely parts of Visage that like areas in the house that are built with that like what do you call that? Not a landing. No, it's not. Is it a landing area where you look over from first floor
Maybe
into the ground floor? Yeah, I
the
don't know. Whatever it's
the
called. Like there's
foyer,
the
foyer.
foyer. Yeah. That's what I wanted to say, but I was like, I don't think that's right. But
Well,
yeah,
I think that's really where you come in at from the door. I think that part's the
yeah, I
foyer.
think so. Our next podcast will be on house layouts in order to redeem ourselves here. But no, there's like an area in the Visage house that like it reminds me of that, and it's like definitely a nod. Well, that entire game is a love letter to PT for sure. Also, Beneviento Baby is 100% based on Sync Baby,
Definitely, definitely, and
without a doubt.
the way the hallways look in that one's particular
Hmm.
section, particular is that what I said? Particular section. It reminds me of PT. Yeah, that winding and the kind of blandish color. I don't know.
Somebody else was saying in a YouTube video that I also watched last night, and I knew about this, but I hadn't like seen it. Was that at a certain point in the game, I think when you have a flashlight and you're walking down the hallway, Lisa is actually behind you the entire time. and you can
Oh yeah.
make that out by the silhouette that's being cast on the wall in front of you. There's like two silhouettes, yours and hers. But if you
Hmm.
if you do a mod and you actually look at what's happening, she's right. She's actually fucking right behind you. But when you try and do it in the game, if you try and see her in game without any of the mods, she like disappears or whatever. But she is behind you the whole time, which is really really freaky.
Yeah, PT is just unsettling. It's unsettling to play. Period. I wish they'd already release it on Steam. They'd make a killing.
Oh, I don't know why why they even made the decision to pull it from the store. I know the game was cancelled, like, but to pull it from the PlayStation Store as well. Like, if you just slapped a price tag of $3 on that game, you'd make your production costs back and then some. Even today, like
Yeah.
in my opinion, like it's just such a it's the most loved game that was never released. Madness.
One of
Madness.
the most iconic horror games, but it's teaser. That's it.
Yeah, it's funny. One of my favorite metal albums is an album that was never released as well. Funnily enough, I don't need to get into the particulars about that because I'm not sure if I can be talking about that from a legal standpoint. But I have the album. Anyway, once again, trying to single handedly take down this podcast.
Well, you're doing a good job.
Yeah, sure.
Kidding.
Sure. Well, that's it from me with everything that I wanted to say. Horror is always going to have a place in my heart, be it TV shows, movies, video games. I live for it and I love it. And I loved sharing all of my scary experiences with you today, all the way from Super Mario Land right up to House Beneviento. We really covered a wide range of games today for sure.
Yeah, this was a good topic. I wouldn't mind visiting this topic again in the future too.
Yeah.
Picking out some more
Yeah,
because we didn't cover everything, obviously.
for sure.
But
And
just
then you mentioned stuff that I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. I wish I had thought about that. I wish I had come up with that. The only one that because we obviously, me and Nukes talk about this stuff before we record the podcast, was the one that we would have shared was House Beneviento. I think that was like the main one that we wanted to get into. There's actually a couple on my list today that I did want to skim over, but I didn't actually even mention them because they just passed as all thoughts generally do within a podcast of smaller things to mention. But yeah, for sure we can bring them up in a part two. I'd absolutely love to do that.
absolutely.
Alrighty, folks, that does it for today's episode. We are on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, so feel free to follow us on those platforms. We do appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this, please give us a thumbs up or a like or whatever mechanic the platform has to make us hit those algorithms. We really sincerely do appreciate it, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. See ya.
See y'all.